number of cells that are present, different types of cells that are present in the trachea. The trachea. So the trachea is a 10 to 11 centimeter long tube formed by cartilage and fibromuscular membrane inside. It is lined internally by mucosa. So it starts from the level of the sixth cervical vertebra and ends at the level of the sixth thoracic vertebrae. So remember that it starts from 6 to 6 and it typically branches out into two bronchi inferior to the sternal plane. And so basically the upper continuation of the trachea is from the larynx, and inferiorly it divides into two bronchi. So the length of the trachea is not like 10 to 11 centimeter long. So whenever you take a deep breath, the trachea is mobile so that it can increase in length and reach at the level of completely at the level of the sixth thoracic vertebrae during a deep inspiration. Questions. How long is the trachea? What cartilage is it made up of? What are the demarcation of the trachea in terms of the organs and in terms of the thoracic and the cervical vertebrae? Moving on to the relations of the trachea. So there are two types of relations, two parts of the trachea, the cervical part and the thoracic part, because of course it lies between the cervical. Incomplete. It actually lies between the cervical and thoracic vertebrae. So considering the anterior relations first, but however we're going to divide the anterior relations in the terms of organs, in the terms of organs, it is covered anteriorly by the skin and by the superficial and the deep cervical fascia. Then as we go downwards towards the fourth tracheal cartilage, so remember there are 15 tracheal cartilage, but as we go downwards towards the fourth tracheal cartilage, it is crossed by the isthmus of the thyroid gland. And considering the muscles, there is the sternohyoid and the sternothyroid muscles. The arteries and the vein, it is crossed by the jugular arch superiorly in the anterior relation, and downwards below the isthmus of the thyroid we have the two superior thyroid arteries. Antero-inferiorly there's the pretracheal fascia. Okay, so remember, then inferiorly we have the thyroid veins and the thyroid ema artery. Question. Give the anterior relations of the cervical part of the trachea in the terms of fascia, the muscles, the arteries, and the organs. What is the posterior relation? The posterior relation is just the esophagus that is in the relation of the cervical trachea. Just remember that the esophagus is the one that passes in all of the three mediastinal cavities. Lateral relations. Lateral relations are mostly observed in paired organs. So we can say that in terms of organs, it is the thyroid gland, which is basically lobular. It has two lobes. So at the level of the fifth or sixth cervical cartilage, we have the lateral relation that is of the thyroid gland. And in terms of arteries, we have the carotid, the inferior thyroid. In terms of nerve, we have the laryngeal nerves, the recurrent laryngeal nerves, and it occurs on both of the side of the trachea and the esophagus. Question. Give the posterior relation and the lateral relation of the trachea. Okay, now that was the cervical part. Moving on to the thoracic part, or the inferior part of the trachea. The inferior part of the trachea is basically from the mediastinum of the sternum. So here too, just like the cervical part of the trachea, we have the anterior relations, the posterior relations, and the lateral relations. So As it descends from the superior mediastinum, the thoracic trachea lies behind the manubrium sterni. So that is the relation of the bone. Moving on to the relations with the muscle, anteriorly we have again the sternohyoid and the sternothyroid. With the organs, we have the thymic or the thymic remnants, and of course, no, just the thymic remnants. We don't have the thyroid here this time. And moving on towards the arteries, we have the left common carotid arteries, the brachiocephalic arteries, the aortic arch, the brachiocephalic trunk, and moving on towards the veins, we have the inferior thyroid veins, the brachiocephalic veins, the deep cardiac plexus. Lastly, the lymph nodes. We have all of the lymph nodes that are present in the anterior of the trachea. Now moving on towards the questions. Describe the anterior relations of the trachea in terms of bones, muscles, organs, arteries, and veins. The posterior relation. Here again, the posterior relationship is only the esophagus, which is a good thing because it was the same in the cervical part too. The lateral relations. Laterally, there is the lung and the pleura of the lung. Now over here and in the lateral relation, we have to divide it into the left and the right part. So towards the right, we have the right lung and the pleura. We don't have any arteries at the right. However, we have some veins. That's called as the right brachiocephalic vein, the superior vena cava, and the azygos vein. In terms of nerves, we have the right vagus nerve. On the left side, we have the arch of the aorta, the left common carotid, and subclavian arteries. What is the vascular supply of the trachea? The trachea is supplied mainly by the branches of the inferior thyroid artery, which anastomoses with the descending branches of the bronchial arteries. Question: which arteries mainly supply to the trachea? What is the nervous connections of the trachea? The anterior and the posterior pulmonary plexuses innervate the trachea and the bronchi. The two plexuses are interconnected. The trachea is innervated by the branches of the vagi or the vagus, the recurrent laryngeal nerves, and the sympathetic trunks. Question: state what are the innervations of the trachea? It is common with the bronchi, but you have to state that. The venous supply of the trachea. The veins draining the trachea end in the inferior thyroid venous plexus. The lymph that drains it passes to the peritracheal and paratracheal lymph nodes. Name the plexus of the vein that mostly drains the trachea. And what are the names of the lymph nodes that are present near the trachea? The cartilaginous support. The trachea and the extrapulmonary bronchi contains a framework of incomplete rings of hyaline cartilage, which are then united by fibrous tissue and then eventually by smooth muscles. So basically can say that the trachea is primarily consisting of hyaline cartilage, but as it bifurcates into the bronchi, the amount of hyaline cartilage that is present decreases in number, and they just have this continuous place or islands of hyaline cartilage on their walls as the trachea branches into the bronchus. The tracheal cartilage. There are 16 to 20 tracheal cartilages that measures 4 mm in height and 1 mm in thickness. They appear mostly thicker in the middle part. The external surface is flat and the internal surface is slightly convex. So another feature is that the cartilage of the ring encompasses only 2/3 of the trachea. That means in order to allow more flexibility of the trachea, part of the trachea is left uncovered with the cartilage and is mostly made up of fibroelastic and muscular tissue. Question: how many tracheal rings are there, and what is the measurement of them in the terms of height and thickness? Also, state why is there a progression of the hyaline cartilage? Why does the hyaline cartilage lessens as we move from the trachea to the bronchioles? Microstructure of the conducting airways. The conducting airways are lined by a mucosa, and the epithelium lies on a thin connective tissue called as the lamina propria. External to this is a submucosa, which is also composed of connective tissues, in which there are embedded airway smooth muscle, glands, cartilaginous plate, and depending on the level in the respiratory tree, the vessels, lymphoid tissues, and nerves. Cartilage is present from the trachea to the smallest bronchi. However, you have to remember this, that is not present in on the bronchioles. Now, question. Divide the internal microstructure of the trachea and the bronchi into 3 parts. And what is a definitive feature of the progression of the presence of cartilage from the trachea to the bronchioles? The epithelium of the trachea and the bronchi. So you can say that the epithelium of the trachea and the bronchi are quite similar to each other. There's only a little bit variations in the aspect of the cells that are present as you progress from the trachea towards the alveoli. The level or the stratification of the cell decreases. So basically you have more cilia and more stratification of the cell, or more levels of the cell at the level of the trachea. But as you move towards the bronchioles, the size of the cell becomes thinner in terms of the length, and also the cilia, the amount of cilia that is present on the apical surface decreases. And also, the epithelium of the smaller bronchi and the bronchioles are folded into conspicuous longitudinal ridges that allows for the changes in the diameter. So, because of the influx of the air, there is an increase and a decrease in the alveoli. So, to allow this, there's a presence of ridges and foldings. Also, to summarize everything, first we have the pseudostratified and columnar ciliated epithelia with a lot of dispersed mucus-secreting goblet cells. But as we move towards the end, it changes into squamous type. Predominantly, there are 6 different types of cells that are present, and these include the ciliated columnar, the goblet, the clara, the basal, brush, and neuroendocrine cells. There's also the presence of lymphocyte and mast cells, which are mostly migratory and lie into the epithelium to form the underlying connective tissue. Question: explain the progression and the changes in the stratification of the cells from the trachea towards the alveoli, which are the six type of cells that are predominantly present. And why is there a folding of the epithelium as we move downwards? Cell type number 1, ciliated columnar cells. Ciliated columnar cells are the ones that are present in a large number in this tract. Their apical surface consists of up to 300 projecting cilia. They extend into a watery fluid that is secreted by the submucosal glands or the goblet cells. They beat usually at the rate of 12 to 16 per second. And whenever there is an whenever there is an inflammation, the rate increases. There's also pathology that is associated with the abnormal beating of the cilia, or the cilia dyskinesia, which is an abnormality, a feature of Cart-Ganner's syndrome. This is an abnormal autosomal recessive disorder called as the Cart-Ganner syndrome, which basically affects the motility of the cilia that is present in the respiratory column. The goblet cells. Okay, question. Explain the ciliated columnar cells, the rate at which they beat, the pathology that is associated with it, and how many cilia are present on the apical surface. The goblet cells. The goblet cells are usually present in the trachea and distal and the smaller bronchi, but they're completely absent in the bronchioles. They consist of a large secretory vacuoles which release mucinogen, and the pathology here includes smoking, so the deposition of tar in the trachea increases the secretion of the goblet cells because they need to drive this foreign object away. And this leads to the extension of the presence of the goblet cells into the bronchiole, which is a pathology. Question: what is the peculiar characteristic of goblet cells being and why? And what do they secrete? And why? When is there a presence of goblet cells and bronchioles? Give the pathology. The Clara cells. Clara cells are cuboidal, non-ciliated cells with apices that bulge into the lumen. They contain granules, mostly lysosomes. They produce surfactant lipoprotein and share functional similarities with type 2 alveolar cells. They also regulate ion transport. So basically, the job of the Clara cells is to prevent friction. The basal cells. Basal cells are small rounded cells that are present in the parts of the airway where the pseudostratified respiratory epithelium is the most. So basically, they're present at the larger conducting passages. Their main job is to act as a stem cell for the epithelia. So they're constantly dividing, and hence they're called as the mitotic stem cells. Question: describe Clara cells and basal cells. The brush cells. The brush cells are slender, non-ciliated cells, and they consist of and they have the apical microvilli instead of cilia on their apices. They are present all throughout the conducting system, and it is believed that they have a nervous response, and basically they act as a receptor, like a sensory receptor. What are the neuroendocrine cells? The neuroendocrine cells are mainly found at the basal part of the epithelium. They are rounded and they have the cytoplasm and the basal nuclei with dense colored. They have a dense core granule called and they're mostly called as the APUT cells, or the amine precursor uptake and decarboxylation cells. They are numerous in the fetal lung and decrease dramatically after birth. Question: describe the brush cells and the neuroendocrine cells. Also, what is the similarity in between them? Lastly, we have the lymphocytes and the mast cells. The T lymphocytes are derived from mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue, or MALT. Remember this name. Mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue in the walls of the passages that occur within the epithelium through the conducting airway tissue, particularly the extrapulmonary portion. They are concerned with the immune system, the surveillance of the epithelium, and they lie just beneath the non-ciliated cells of the microfold, or the M-type cell. What are the mast cells? Mast cells are present within the basal region of the epithelia. They resemble connective tissue mast cells, and their cytoplasm contain histamine granules, which are released which are released due to response of an irritant or inhaled allergens. Question: describe the function of the lymphocytes and mast cells, which are migratory cells of the trachea and the bronchi. Lastly, we have the submucosal glands. Submucosal glands include the tubular-acinar seromucous glands that are present on the submucosa of the tracheae, mostly in the trachea and to a lesser extent near the bronchioles. They contain separate mucus and serous cells that are the main source of mucins, bacteriostatic substances like lysozymes and lactoferrin, antibodies, mostly immunoglobulin IgA, plasma cells, and protease inhibitor, alpha antitrypsin, and neutralizing leukocyte-derived proteases. These cells, or these submucosal glands, are further surrounded by myoepithelial cells, which are innervated by autonomic fibers. Question: what are the two types of submucosal glands? What do they secrete? And what are the cells that are supporting cells of these cells?